In this AI summary, Dr. Andrew Huberman suggests that music is not only perceived through our auditory systems, but is a complex neurological event that requires the engagement of almost every segment of our brain. He points out that when we listen to music, it is more than just a passive act of receiving sounds from an external source. Instead, it becomes an active, intrinsically complex process where the brain and body work together to decode and interpret those sounds. This results in us creating our own perception of the music based on how our neural ensembles, or groups of neurons, fire and interpret these sounds. Notably, music is not just about enjoyment or entertainment. It can be a powerful tool that impacts our brain states and bodily states. For instance, different types of music can trigger different emotions and shift moods, acting as an emotional stimulant. This emotional effect dovetails into the long-standing question of whether sad music acts as a catharsis for our emotions of sadness or if it actually intensifies such feelings. Studies have begun to shed light on this complex interaction. Huberman also explores the concept of music as a vehicle for enhancing learning, memory, and brain plasticity, which is the brain's capacity to adapt to changes over time. He suggests that we can use music as a way to unlock our cognitive potential and learn more effectively in multiple realms of life. In one intriguing segment, the podcast delves into the influence of music on work productivity. It suggests that listening to music during brief rest periods, rather than throughout the work, can enhance productivity. For those that enjoy music as a work backdrop, the podcast explains how that preference may be linked to how their brain developed at a particular stage. In terms of the evolution of communication, Dr. Huberman posits that music likely evolved before spoken language. Unlike language, which can describe finite objects, music has the unique ability to express and evoke a vast array of emotions. Interestingly, music can even communicate intent. Think about the gradual change in tempo in an approaching drum sound that signifies aggression or an imminent serious event. This comprehensive exploration reinforces the profound impact that music can have on our neurological and emotional state, helping us not only understand, but also better navigate our reactions and responses to it. From the Huberman Lab Podcast, Dr. Andrew Huberman discusses how music is intimately tied to our movements and physiology, much deeper than the sound we hear. It stirs up various neural circuits, stimulating movement, bodily actions, and actions in anticipation of music changes. Essentially, our body is rhythmically involved in the music we listen to from the get-go. For instance, prenatal studies report babies as young as 3 months old respond to music with rhythmic movements. They'd sway their torsos, bob their heads, or even wiggle their limbs, similar to dancing, sparked by different frequencies and arrangements of sound. This starts a fascinating discussion around how specific music types can provoke particular movements due to the neurons responsible for moving the muscles. Dr. Huberman also explores the link between music and our cardiovascular system. Research suggests the positive impacts of music on our health aren't just from direct listening, but substantially due to shifts in our breathing caused by music. This association emerges from a mechanism, respiratory sinus arrhythmia, a change in heart rate linked to the breath cycle. When we inhale, the heart rate speeds up. When we exhale, it slows down. Thus, music influences our heart rate variability via changes in our breathing patterns. Slaying across studies demonstrating the effects of music on physiology, the podcast discusses substantial findings. Listening to preferred music for dedicated periods each day enhances heart rate variability, reduces resting heart rate, and provokes heart rate variability increases, not just during listening, but also during the rest of the day and night. Therefore, music impacts our health metrics, reflecting its impact on parasympathetic nervous system activation, which promotes relaxation and slowness. In this regard, music exhibits an intricate capacity to regulate our physiological responses. Its influence on the body extends far and wide, impacting our heart rate, stimulating physical responses, and triggering neurological reactions, making it a powerful tool for mental and physical health management. In this section of the Huberman Lab Podcast, Dr. Andrew Huberman delves deeper into the substantial effects that music has on our neural circuitry, in particular how music stirs up physiological responses in our brain and body. Dr. Huberman starts by explaining that we don't just passively listen to music. It profoundly engages various neural networks. The act of merely listening to music can indeed activate multiple areas of the brain and body, including the olfactory system, responsible for smell. While music phenomenally continues to stimulate diverse neural circuits, the most remarkable of these is our natural predilection for movement when engrossed with music, providing a potent tool that can surge our motivational state. Another fascinating exploration is the role of the frontal cortex and its activation during music listening. The frontal cortex is a crucial part of our brain that involves numerous functions, including understanding context, suppressing certain actions, and notably making predictions. On music listening, our frontal cortex is actively predicting what we're going to hear next based on prior heard sound or melody, a particular aspect that music capitalizes to evoke our sense of surprise or delight through the deployment of a neuromodulator called dopamine. This dopamine release phenomenon happens when the prediction machinery in our brain, aka the frontal cortex, anticipates a particular sound sequence based on past experience. But when the music switches unexpectedly, the mismatch from the expectation leads to a sort of novelty due to the break of prediction. This novelty, if enjoyed, prompts the release of dopamine, causing excitement and enjoyment. If unenjoyed, it tends to reduce the dopamine count from their baseline levels. Therefore, listening to music derives robust activation of our brain's anticipation machinery alongside activation of novelty registering circuits, such as the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens. The additional activations occur in the amygdala, stimulating arousal and alertness, and in the parahippocampal formation, encoding and storing memories. In essence, the magic of music lies in the way it keenly employs our brain's intricate predictive functions, effectively playing with our expectations to instigate emotional and physiological responses. Harnessing this dynamic interplay between music and our brain can result in not just rhythmic movements controlled by neurons, but it's also a unique avenue to tap into arrays of emotions and motivations. In the podcast, Dr. Huberman moves on to explore even more complex neural activations triggered by music, focusing on its connection to memory, motivation, and movement. Music, he explains, has an outstanding capability to induce a flood of memories. When we listen to certain songs, it tends to activate the parahippocampal regions of our brain, bringing forth a spectrum of personal history, emotional memories, and even a sense of self and others. Music doesn't just reconnect us to our past, though. It is also capable of driving movement and motivation. It activates basal ganglia, a group of structures in the brain associated with initiating action and regulating movement. With it, the cerebellum, another crucial area often referred to as the mini-brain, helps in rhythmic timing and processing, thereby regulating our movement along the music. It's fundamentally shifting us from a state of motivation deficit to a state of increased motivation, stimulating our urge to move. Interestingly, this motivational aspect isn't dependent on the lyrics or familiarity with the song, but rather on the cadence or beat. Fast-paced music exceeding 140, 150 beats per minute stimulates the go circuits, shifting the listener towards initiating action. It elicits the release of certain neurotransmitters such as dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine, making them more likely to move. This property of music has made it a popular choice for workout playlists, providing the required energy rush and motivation. Moving on to cognitive tasks, Dr. Huberman presents counterintuitive findings from the latest research. You would think your favorite music could boost focus and productivity, but studies suggest the opposite. On cognitive tasks requiring high focus, individuals performed best in complete silence. Instrumental background music appeared only second in this list, while music with lyrics negatively affected cognitive performance. Favorite music surprisingly led to the poorest performance, possibly due to the emotional engagement it demands. Considering these findings, for anyone looking to improve focus, concentration, or motivation for tasks at hand, opt for a quick dose of fast-paced, preferably instrumental music, before diving into the task. Although you might feel inclined to keep the tunes going, remember that when it's time to get into deep cognitive work, silence is golden. In his podcast, Dr. Andrew Huberman emphasizes that silence, white noise, the sound of brown noise, or 40 Hz binaural beats are ideal environments for cognitive work when compared to music being played in the background. However, if one does choose to listen to music whilst working, it should ideally be instrumental and set at a pace faster than 140 to 150 beats per minute. This does not imply that listeners need to meticulously measure the beat frequency, but simply understanding the general principles of how music impacts the brain might help users leverage it better. Dr. Huberman points out that the goal of science isn't necessarily to optimize everything, but to understand how to improve performance based on individual scenarios. One key insight is why listening to favorite music might hinder cognitive performance. This happens because when we listen to familiar lyrics, the semantic content of the song competes with the narrative comprehension from the material that we're studying, creating multiple dialogues in our brains, thus reducing focus. Interestingly, it's suggested that these negative effects of music on cognition can be circumvented by listening to music during breaks between cognitive work periods. Contrary to the idea that music is universally harmful for focus and cognition, data indicates that listening to music, even those with lyrics, during breaks can actually enhance cognitive performance and focus upon returning to the task. In terms of physical exercise, the data on whether music aids performance is mixed. Some studies show improved performance, some show no difference, while others report reduced output. Dr. Huberman suggests this might be due to the variations in the types of physical exercises examined in different studies. One thing that does stand out from the literature is the indication that bouts of exertion interspersed with intervals of music can enhance performance more than constant music during the entire workout regimen. As with cognitive tasks, even music with lyrics can be beneficial if listened to during breaks between periods of exertion. These intervals should ideally last for about 90 minutes, following which a break is due, although it once again comes down to personal preference. The crucial aspect is balance. Shifting between silence and music, based on timing and personal preference, can effectively leverage the engaging qualities of music while also ensuring that it doesn't hamper focus and concentration unduly. In the podcast, Dr. Andrew Huberman discusses the intricate relationship between music and the human brain. He dives into the neuroscience behind how different types of music can evoke emotional responses and alter states of mind. According to Dr. Huberman, when we listen to music, it stimulates neurons in our brains to fire at the same frequency as the music we're listening to. This fascinating process essentially transforms the frequencies of sound into a pharmacologic concert within your brain. This release of neurochemicals like dopamine or serotonin is often what causes certain music to evoke certain emotional states. A significant piece of information is that this process doesn't necessarily need lyrics to happen. Even instrumental music can cause these effects. Dr. Huberman shares some surprising statistics to illustrate our relationship with music. Around 90% of people listen to music to relax, 82% to make themselves happy, 46.5% to process their emotions, and 32.5% to increase their sense of concentration. Interestingly, it appears that the pace and tone of music can greatly influence its impact. Fast music averaging 140 to 150 beats per minute tends to make us happier and more relaxed, and it activates facial muscles that open up and lift the eyes. On the other hand, slower music, slower than 60 beats per minute, is often categorized as sad music. It activates forehead muscles that furrow the brows, creating a serious or contemplative facial expression. The lyrics don't seem to matter as much as the basic rhythm and pace. Fast-paced music with complete nonsense for lyrics can still evoke happiness. Dr. Huberman also discusses the emerging role of artificial intelligence in music production. AI programs are being trained to create songs based on neuroscientific criteria, potentially leading to music optimized to make humans feel happier more effectively than ever before. In Dr. Huberman's view, AI's role in music is not necessarily negative. He suggests that AI may discover patterns of music that could positively affect our brains in ways we haven't been able to accomplish yet, potentially leading to unprecedented brain-boosting benefits from specific music compositions. Lastly, Dr. Huberman mentions an intriguing find in neuroscientific research. It takes only 9 minutes of listening to happy music to significantly shift one's mood into a happier state. This lends a tangible and scientifically backed tip on using music as an effective mood booster. In this portion of the podcast, Dr. Andrew Huberman discusses how music can allow people to process their emotions, especially sadness, elucidating how music can serve as an emotional catharsis. This theory of vascotharsis iterates that expressing and feeling one's emotions, often through music, acts as a mechanism to extrude or dispel these sentiments. Studies have shown that individuals experiencing sadness can facilitate their emotional process and start to move past their despondency by listening to slower, sad music, typically around 50 or 60 beats per minute for 13 minutes or more. It isn't necessary for the listener to connect with the lyrics. The rhythm can suffice in inducing this emotional response. Dr. Huberman extends this concept to emotions of anxiety and relief. He introduces a breathing technique called physiological sigh, involving 2 intakes of breath through the nose and a long exhale through the mouth to reduce one's anxiety levels. But interestingly, highlights that listening to certain types of calming music can accomplish the same outcome. He cites a study from the University of Pennsylvania showing that listening to the track Weightless by Marconi Union for 3 minutes reduced anxiety in study participants by up to 65%, equal to the effect of certain commonly prescribed anti-anxiety drugs. Beyond the emotional aspect, Dr. Huberman delves into the cognitive benefits of engaging with music, especially for children. He points out that young children who learn to play an instrument, or preferably multiple instruments, exhibit enhanced brain connectivity that persists into adulthood. Even for those who didn't learn an instrument as a child, expanding their auditory experience to novel forms of music for 30 to 60 minutes 3 days a week can similarly augment brain connectivity and facilitate neuroplasticity. Mentioning the corpus callosum, the structure mediating this increased connectivity between the brain's 2 hemispheres, Dr. Huberman stresses that this is not about enhancing emotional or logical capacities, as is commonly misconstrued, but about amplifying all brain circuits linked to the corpus callosum, thus boosting cognizance, language learning, speech, and mathematical abilities. Dr. Huberman underscores the significant intersection of music, emotion, brain, and neuroplasticity, demonstrating that music is far more than an art form. It's also a tool for emotional processing and cognitive advancement. Dr. Huberman underscores the significant advantages of not just listening to the music one loves, but also exploring novel forms of music. He argues that this musical exploration appears to activate brain circuitry that can augment learning and comprehension abilities, facilitating neuroplasticity. He highlights how engaging with new music genres, particularly when one pays active attention to the music instead of merely playing it in the background, has been shown scientifically to enhance the brain's capacity for learning and neurological adaptability. He delves into the fascinating connection between the mathematical structure of music and the brain's neuronal firing patterns. This element isn't present in our other sensory experiences like smelling, tasting, or seeing, making it profoundly unique to auditory stimuli. Essentially, different sound frequencies can stimulate varied neuronal firing rates, with the process being likened to playing one's neurons like a piano. Huberman asserts how music has an exceptional ability to manipulate neurological chemistry, emotive states, and motivation. Indeed, music is much more than the sum of its parts, as it can effectively evoke emotions, drive motivation, and even act as a balancing agent between sound and silence in our lives. While today's discussion wasn't able to cover the vast topic of music and the brain exhaustively, Huberman assures his audience that future podcast sessions will feature expert guests to delve deeper into the impact of singing, songwriting, group music improvisation on brain function and plasticity. Huberman hopes that this discourse will prompt listeners to perceive, listen, and even utilize music differently, understanding that the human brain possesses a considerable amount of neural real estate specifically designed to engage with music. This intertwining of the auditory art form and cognitive function not only enriches daily experiences, but also provides invaluable tools for emotional processing and cognitive growth. Finally, Huberman encourages listeners to engage with him and the podcast on various platforms, including subscribing to their YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and social media channels. They also have an available zero-cost monthly newsletter that provides podcast summaries and various toolkits, such as those for sleep, focus, neuroplasticity, fitness, and far more. Check out the full podcast by clicking the link in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for listening to this podcast summary episode of The Pod Slice.